Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today, we shift gears, pun intended, as I showcase the Azimuth Twin Turbo. Now, I'm not an Azimuth dealer, and this watch right here is actually not for sale, but if you're interested in Azimuth, reach out to me. Chris Long's a good friend of mine out of Singapore. He's the guy we all wish we could be in the watch space, a mechanical engineer who's turned watch designer and then turned watch manufacturer, building things inspired by science fiction, robots, automobiles, motorcycles. He's Singaporean and he designs out of Singapore, but he builds the watches out of Neuchâtel. And this one came out in 2016. His foray into the world of vintage automobiles, the Twin Turbo features a lot of automotive imagery and a couple of very cool features built in. Now, there are 4 different colors. This is the yellow gold. There's also anthracite, silver, and red. The red, which is the Twin Turbo portfolio, that's 50-piece edition. The other 3, silver, anthracite, and yellow gold, those are 88 pieces. So all of these are fairly scarce. The watch is difficult to describe, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, depending on how you measure it, it can seem wildly disparate in size. I'm just going to show you how it fits. Before I talk about dimensions, let me show you what it looks like on the wrist. The watch is compact. The actual pivot distance between the centers of the lugs, the pivot distance is only 46.5 millimeters. So in terms of how it fits on even a small wrist, quite agreeable. Now it is a driver's watch, so as you're holding the steering wheel, imagine a steering wheel, you sort of have a side scroll display, so it's easy to see both of the independent time zones. Now don't get scared, but I measured 27 millimeters thick, but that's at the top of the cowl. The rest is actually quite a bit thinner. Now in terms of down the wrist, how is it lengthwise? Well, it's about 50.4 millimeters, which sounds huge until you remember, again, the effective lug-to-lug span here is 46.5 millimeters. If you need a total distance across the wrist, it's going to be 53.7, but that's from the bezel of the dials all the way to the back of the pivot lug. Think of it as a 46.5 on the wrist, and you'll understand how it sits and how it fits. I'd recommend it for a wrist 15 centimeters circumference or larger. Now, the strap is part of the fun. It's actually part of the design conceit as well. So we've got this ribbed profile in black calfskin, and Ferrari aficionados know that this pattern is often described as the Daytona seat. It is ubiquitous as an option in modern Ferraris, and of course it's named after the same seat pattern as featured in the late 60s through mid-70s 365 GTB4 Daytona Coupe. So this is the Daytona seat, recreated here in a lovely type of calfskin that's also commonly used as automotive upholstery. You can see it's got a very pronounced semi-gloss granular texture. There's also a contrasting stitch, and you can see that the stitch matches the tonneau. Taking a quick look at the buckle, it's fairly simple. It's Azimuth branded. This one still has some packing stickers on it, but it's a combination of satin and polish. It is a twin trigger release. Internally, it's polished and engine turned, and it's a double fold, which is nice because I find single fold deployments sometimes have one big up and over fold that can pinch a small wrist, so this is great in that regard. And because this is a large and weighty watch, it's nice to have a locking deployment with a twin trigger release here. Of course, the strap is a custom piece, but it's also a substantial piece that should last long term, and you can see they're not cutting costs using hex screws right here to attach the strap rather than a spring bar system. Not only is it more secure, but a hex screw can take more torque, so it's more secure in the literal sense, even compared to a flathead screw, and it's less likely to strip out. Now you can see that there's a lovely application on the steel case in gloss metal that gives it an enamel-like shine, and then underneath you can see that the case platform is a combination of satin and polish that's really quite attractive, with media blasting on the underside. And you can see the Azimuth logo, which is inspired by the hairspring spiral of a conventional watch assortment. So the hairspring of a watch inspires that pattern. You can also see that they have a very avant-garde company logo that's written out long form. There's a lovely frosted, almost automotive engine compartment-like finish to the tonneau itself, which is made of aluminum. The case is steel, the bezels of the dials are steel, but this is all aluminum, and it's got an anodized metallic shine to it. Now, when you open it up, listen to this, just listen to it. It has a wonderfully sharp snap because the design incorporates a spring-loaded pin snap, so when it closes, It closes with a wonderful positive snick and opens with a snap. Now what we have here are two dials that are inspired by vintage automotive gas caps or radiator caps. We have two nasals, inside of which are contained independent vintage ETA 25122 manual wind movements. Now these are tiny movements, 17.5 millimeters in diameter. They're used in a lot of tiny Cartier mechanical watches through the years. Manual wind, each one has a 44-hour power reserve, pivots on 17 joules, and generally, I believe these later 25122s operate at a 3 hertz beat rate. And what's fun is you can set them independently, and they have very different displays designed to read as automotive dashboard instruments from the 1960s. You can see right down to the font used, as well as the sectors and the calibrations, the dashes, as well as the hands and indicators. All of this is driven by vintage imagery. You can see it's also got a nice sort of recessed pebbly granulation around the center of the dials. Now there is lume, not a ton, but there is lume, and you can read these in the dark. And so this is a true dual-time watch. A true dual-time watch that also has a lot more automotive imagery going on. So you got the Daytona seats with the driving glove and upholstery style calfskin. You've got this tonneau. Now this could be interpreted as a couple of things. It could be interpreted as the bonnet or the hood of a car. Now Chris is from Singapore, so he'd use the British bonnet, but I'm going to call it the hood of a car. In Britain they call the hood, I think the hood is the roof and the bonnet is the hood. So are you confused? Here's the thing. I don't think this is the hood of a car, at least from an American perspective. What I see is the cowling of instruments on a dashboard. So think Alfa Romeo Montreal, and you can really see where I'm coming from dashboard-wise. Now, what it could also represent would be the tonneau cover with fairings that you see on some 60s Roadsters. So take a look at a 1961 to 1963 Ford Thunderbird Sport Roadster. The Sport Roadster option added Kelsey Hayes wire wheels and a tonneau that covered the rear seats and faired in the front seat headrest. So that's what I'm really seeing right here. The watch is 30 meters water resistant, so this is one for driving, not diving. Nevertheless, it has a reassuring solidity to it, mainly because it is largely made of steel. It is very hefty, almost feeling a bit like precious metal. The quality of the assembly, the fixtures, the hinges, the pin snaps, the metals and the materials involved, as well as the presentation, is all really upscale. And I've long thought that Azimuth, operating on a really small scale, is actually a great way to get the look that we often associate with the likes of Urwerk, Nordzeitmaschine, MB&F, even Richard Mille, and at a much lower price. The watches feel, in terms of solidity, like they cost $1 million. And if you're like me and you like robots and science fiction and motorcycles and cars along with watches, this is a great way to weave them all together. I'll also opine to Chris that while this watch is automotive inspired, and Azimuth does have an entirely separate robot-inspired Mr. Roboto product line, the closer I bring this thing to the camera, the more I'm sort of getting Johnny 5 from Short Circuit. Do you see it? Reach out to me, Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com, if you're interested in Azimuth, and I can refer you to the best folks.